That is the question. So, silent options and alcohol don't mix is my advice. My other advice is marry Piper Kerman because she's a wonderful storyteller, a wonderful wife, and she's about to tell you a little bit more about herself. Come on up, honey.
I was curious about sailing lessons in Ohio, aren't you? Right. Where did you find out? Yeah. I am the wife of Larry Smith. Let's give Larry Smith a big hand. What Tosh he was referring to. I will say it's interesting to have a reader in the house because, oops, I just unplugged it. Sorry. Because, you know, he reads, and so I walked into my home office and he was looking at my book, and I was like, give me that. It's a grown-up book. I wrote a book called Orange is the New Black, which is a memoir about one of the stupider and more immoral things that I ever did and the consequences that attended it. You know, I carried a bag of drug money from Chicago to Brussels, and 10 years later, the Fed sent me to prison. So my 6 words of advice is you learn more from your failures. And you do. I promise you, you do. I've learned a lot from my failures, a lot, good and bad. I know how to make a lighter out of 2 batteries and a piece of wire and a gum wrapper. I learned a lot of other excellent survival skills, including, you know, weapon making, which fortunately I didn't have to use. More importantly, I learned a lot about love, a lot about unconditional love, that not the unconditional love that you give, but the unconditional love that you receive, even when you feel like you really don't deserve it. And I learned that from my husband, and I learned that from my family, and I learned that from a much wider community of friends than I even realized I had as I navigated, you know, that experience of being incarcerated. And you learn a lot about forgiveness. You learn a lot about, you know, asking for forgiveness, which is really hard to do. And you learn a lot about forgiving other people and forgiving yourself, which is completely essential. So that memoir, you know, you learn more from your failures, is about all of those things, and it's also about really owning your fuck-ups and really, really taking responsibility for whatever your choices were, because that's actually when you're able to learn from them. You're not really able to learn from them otherwise, and when you do that, it's amazing to me what you learn and what the world returns to you. So right now I teach nonfiction writing to men and women who are in prison in Ohio, doing all kinds of time, including life sentences. And their stories, their nonfiction stories, are absolutely astonishing and heartbreaking and hilarious and a gift from the universe to others. So I hope that people get to read them someday. I'm optimistic about that. I will say, I walked through those halls. I spent way more time in prison than I ever imagined I would when I left prison. And I walked those halls in both of those prisons, that men's prison and that women's prison, and I think about failure a lot, because I think not only about sort of obviously some of the moral lapses that, you know, my students have to own, but I think a lot also about the failures that echo through those halls, which are, you know, our own failures in the wider community. You know, the failures of our public health system, the failures of our public education system. And then I go into class and I stop thinking about those things, and I think about the incredible joy that my students bring to their own stories, and the freedom that they experience during the 2.5 hours that we spend in those rooms is worth everything. So, yeah, you'll learn more from your failures. Thank you.